In February of 2026, I disguised myself as a homeless person and approached a petition circulator on Skid Row near San Pedro and South 6th Street in downtown LA. The petition circulator told me, "We're going to need 14 signatures and we're going to pay you $2. One of our reporters, disguised as a heroin addict with track marks on his arm, asked the homeless, "What's going on here?" They all replied with one word: money. We recorded a woman named Brown handing over cash as payment in exchange for a homeless person to register to vote in a federal election. Now that is a federal crime. Brown described the whole thing as a, quote, pyramid game.
Undercover footage exposes an absolute underworld of election fraud in downtown Los Angeles. Citizen journalists walked right into the Skid Row petition scheme, catching cash for signatures operations and fake voter registries on tape. The corruption is staggering.
Chairman Paul, Ranking Member Peters, and members of this committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify. In February of 2026, I disguised myself as a homeless person and approached a petition circulator on Skid Row near San Pedro and South 6th Street in downtown LA. I saw cash clipped to his shirt, which I thought was odd. The petition circulator told me, "We're going to need 14 signatures and we're going to pay you $2. One of our reporters, disguised as a heroin addict with track marks on his arm, asked the homeless, "What's going on here?" They all replied with one word: money. We recorded a woman named Brown handing over cash as payment in exchange for a homeless person to register to vote in a federal election. Now that is a federal crime. Congress expressly criminalizes payments to people to register to vote. Why? Because the vote is sacred. It's an act of conscience, of judgment. And when it becomes contaminated by incentives, when it is for sale, it undermines the sanctity and fairness of the process designed to elect those who represent us. Our investigation contributed to a federal criminal prosecution, with U.S. Attorney Bill Asalia saying, "Once I saw these videos, I went to work." Brown described the whole thing as a, quote, pyramid game. And then came the irony. In a neighborhood of NGOs in Los Angeles designed to protect the vulnerable homeless population, the person being confronted by the NGOs was not the fraudster, it was the reporter exposing the fraud. Just minutes after we exposed these felonies, I was approached by a man who identified himself as being with the LAPD, and he began to record me. When I pressed him, he admitted he was actually with the LA Homelessness Authority. Under California law, that's a crime. So this was also a form of fraud, albeit covering up for the fraud happening across the street. But it got worse. We witnessed petition circulators giving marijuana in exchange for signatures on the petitions, and when they spotted our camera, they told one of our reporters, "I'm going to knock your bleeping ass, don't come over here again, I'm going to beat your ass." He threatened us, so we decided to band together. We formed a Citizen Journalism Justice League, featuring Savannah Hernandez, Cam Higbee, Anthony Rubin, and John Tro. And over the next few weeks, we caught dozens of these cash and drug exchanges for signatures on the petitions. Together, over the course of those next few weeks, we released reporting that prompted the governor of California not to attack us, but to say that what we did was important and the activity should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. We also found next ballot petitioners asking homeless to sign in other people's names. We recorded over the shoulder one petitioner who took out his phone to access an online database to pull voter rolls and addresses. Quote, "I have an Idaho address," said the voter. The petitioner says, "I'm going to give you an address to write. Your name is Robert." Another says, "I'm giving you a new name." So we visited the residence of those people who were disenfranchised. One of the names was Vicky Walker. The homeowner at that address said for 9 years he received election mail in the name of this Vicky Walker. In fact, he told me he'd received so many ballots in the name of Vicky Walker, he named his cat Vicky Walker. We returned to ask for comment from the petitioner who was offering drugs in exchange for signatures. The same individual who had threatened us earlier, he grabbed the petitions and hid them in his car. When we caught up to him, one of his associates charged at us and punched my producer in the neck. The two men then charged at me. And right before they struck us, Cam Higbee deployed pepper spray. With pepper spray in their eyes, the two men continued to attempt to assail us. My colleague Braden and I had no choice but to run for our lives. To this day, all the fraudsters that committed state crimes roam free. This, as Nick has said, is not a political issue. It's not a partisan issue. It's not a conspiracy theory. And it is most certainly not circumstantial evidence. Everything I've testified to you here, all the quotes and many more, are all recorded on tape. So the question before this committee is not whether the fraud exists or whether it's happening. Oftentimes in politics, y'all debate the facts. The facts are what they are. The question is why the incentives allow it to flourish. There is money in fraud, but there's no money in exposing the fraud. And when laws are ignored without consequences, fraud becomes the incentive. Fraud becomes the model of life. Tony Moore, one of the coordinators for the ballot petitions, told us if there's no consequences, it doesn't matter. And that's the point. I don't have subpoena power. Us journalists don't have the power to do anything but expose. And they campaign in this building about freedom and protecting democracy and preventing disenfranchisement and how nobody is above the law. But if those principles are not enforced, when they're violated in broad daylight, they're not principles at all. They're slogans. And without accountability, our notion of freedom is just an illusion. Thank you.
Senator Peters will introduce our third witness.
Mr. Dylan Hitler-Gadet is the acting Vice President of Policy and Government Affairs at the Project on Government Oversight, commonly known as POGO. Mr. Hitler-Gadet is a nationally recognized expert in a range of good government issues, including government ethics, anti-corruption policy, separation of powers, the rule of law, and government operations integrity and effectiveness. He has testified before Congress on 8 separate occasions on a variety of topics, including preventing waste and fraud, defense spending accountability, judicial ethics, and undue foreign influence. Mr. Hitler-Gadet and POGO have routinely engaged with Congress on bipartisan and pragmatic solutions to address government program integrity and protect taxpayer dollars. Thank you for joining us today, and we appreciate your testimony.
Chairman Paul, Ranking Member Peters, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. My name is Dylan Hitler-Gadet, and I am the Acting Vice President of Policy and Government Affairs at the Project on Government Oversight. We are a nonpartisan, independent watchdog organization with 45 years of experience in promoting accountability, transparency, and effectiveness in the federal government. If you wouldn't mind, I'd like to start with some data to paint a bit of a picture for us. We currently spend about $7 trillion a year in terms of our federal budget. In fiscal year 2025, we ran a $1.8 trillion federal budget deficit. We currently carry a federal debt load of about $40 trillion. And payments on that, interest payments on that debt are the third largest annual expenditure we make each year. The fourth largest of which is our defense budget, which now comes in at a cool $1 trillion. And if President Trump has his way, that number will balloon to a staggering $1.5 trillion this year. Why do I start with this big picture data? It's important to realize that vast sums of taxpayer dollars are at stake when we talk about the issues of waste, fraud, and abuse. It's equally important to remember that the federal government has an equally vast responsibility and an obligation to be the best possible and most responsible caretaker and steward of those taxpayer dollars.
You just witnessed a first-hand account of how the integrity of our elections is being compromised on the streets operating on Skid Row in Los Angeles. Undercover investigators caught petition circulators handing out cash and marijuana in exchange for voter registrations and signatures. Even worse, fraudsters were caught digging through online databases to assign fake names and addresses. Music. Like using a homeowner's address who had received so many phantom ballots over 9 years. He literally named his cat after music. Then when the citizen journalism team got too close, the situation turned explosive. Petitioners threatened to knock your bleeping ass. Music. Hid documents in cars and eventually physically attacked the crew, punching a producer in the neck before pepper spray was deployed. Music. In self-defense to cap off the absolute absurdity, municipal workers even tried to tail and intimidate the journalists, instead of stopping the actual election fraud happening. Right across the street, the core takeaway from this testimony is a stark warning about accountability when felonies are committed in broad daylight and fraudsters, music, roam free because local authorities look the other way. Rules stop being laws and become empty slogans without real consequences. Fraud becomes the business model if you're tired of election integrity being undermined while the music established